batik, the blue batik background.
Yes, I do too.
It really looks very good. I just need to check whether Mas Fakih is here. Fakih is not here. Okay, so I'll just make a quick phone call. Oh, okay.
Somebody's phone is whistling.
Okay, Mas Fakih is coming, joining us.
Mas Fakih, I think is there.
Hello, Ibu Amina.
Salam, doctor. How are you?
Fine. How are you?
Alhamdulillah.
How is your brother?
No news.
No news.
I don't know.
Inshallah well.
Inshallah.
Amin.
Halo Mas Fakih,
Ya, halo.
apa
Mas.
kabar?
Baik. Cerah
Terima
aja.
kasih sudah hadir, Mas Fakih.
Ya.
Halo Mas.
Halo Mas, apa kabar?
Aduh, ini sudah jadi orang top.
Orang apa lagi, Bro? Apa kabar di CRS?
Baik.
Kabar bagus. Mau ulang tahun loh Mas, udah tahu ya?
Nggak tahu.
Ulang tahun ke-15. Ini acaranya dalam rangka ulang tahun ke-15.
Oh, sekaligus ya?
Ya.
Tadi pagi ulang tahun Aman.
Oke. Aman Ruby.
Aman Indonesia, Ruby ya.
Oke.
Apa namanya, meluncing aplikasi Mubadalah.
Oke.
Yeah, we have about more than 200 people registered. What do you think, Pak Zen? Should we just wait for?
I think we should start.
Or we should start. Okay.
Yeah.
Should we start, Ibu Amina and Mas Fakih?
Ya.
I am ready.
Okay.
Ayam gemetar.
Okay. So I will be the MC, Ibu Amina, for today's session. I'll just say very briefly about the rundown. Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam
warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Salam sehat. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Amma ba'du. Thank you very much for I see actually, as I mentioned earlier, more than 200 people registered. So people from all different backgrounds. But of course, first of all, we would like to thank Ibu Amina, who has agreed to be with us this afternoon, and also Mas Fakihuddin Abdul Qadir, who is also in his very busy time, has agreed, even though I was a little bit, not force him, but as him making sure that he is okay to come for today. So thank you very much for both of you. As Pak Zain mentioned earlier, very briefly, that today's event is actually also to, first of all, actually is to welcome Ibu Amina Wadud as a visiting professor at the State Islamic University Sunan Kalijaga, Yogyakarta, but also at ICRS, Indonesian Consortium for Religious Studies, which is a consortium of 3 universities, namely State Islamic University Sunan Kalijaga, Yogyakarta, Universitas Kristen Duta Wacana, also based in Yogyakarta, and Gajah Mada University. The consortium itself as a study program is based at Gajah Mada University. So Ibu Amina, as I mentioned, is currently a visiting professor at these 2 universities, at UIN Sunan Kalijaga and at ICRS, since this semester, and hopefully will be here for 2 years and even more, even longer, inshallah. And Fakih is a graduate of ICRS, and I mean, like, Fakih has many other positions, but as I mentioned about Ibu Amina, I don't think that both of you need further introductions. So first, as I mentioned, is to welcome Ibu Amina in our academic milieu in Yogyakarta, but also, of course, in Indonesia. But as Pak Zain mentioned, this event is also partly to celebrate the 50th anniversary of ICRS, which was established back in 2006. So I would like to briefly read the rundown for today's conversation. So I will stop speaking. I have to stop speaking in 5 minutes, and I will make sure no longer than 5 minutes, just giving an opening. And then hopefully if Pak Mutakin is able to join us, because he's somewhere out there, and he said that he tried to join but was not successful a few minutes ago. So there will be a welcoming remarks from UIN Sunan Kalijaga, from the School of Graduate Studies, UIN Sunan Kalijaga. And then the conversation itself will take place about 35 minutes, in which Ibu Amina will speak about 10 minutes, and then followed by a conversation hosted by Mas Fakih Abdul Qadir. And then we will have around 40 minutes for discussion, question and answer from the audience. Hopefully also, if you post your question in the chat box, we will also be able to, maybe not all, but to take some of the questions from the chat box as well. Okay, so I will stop here, and once again, welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining us. And I will now give the time to Mas Fakih. Thank you.
There is no welcoming from Wayne.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Mas Fakih. See, I mentioned that, but then I forgot. Okay, so I will check whether Mas Mutakin is here. Okay.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, let me check briefly if... Yeah, okay. And Mas Takin, oops. Mas Mutakin, no, he said he couldn't join. He was there. Can you see? He was there waiting to... Yeah, but apparently he cannot join us now. So I don't know if Pak Zainal, I could hijack Pak Zainal maybe to say a few words.
Yeah.
Okay, please, Pak Zain.
Well, I think from CRCS, Bu Irma, you have represented ICRS as well, and both actually ICRS and UIN. But yeah, well, simply welcome, Bu Amina. Inshallah, this is the first of a series of events that we will have, academic events contributing to the academic environment at ICRS, and a kind of introduction, introducing you to our students. Many of them are among the audience, but of course the audience is much larger than ICRS students now. But yeah, well, thank you very much, Bu Amina, for being here, not only for this event, but for the larger plan and cooperation. Yeah, that's all, Bu Irma. Thank you. You're muted, Bu Irma.
Muted me. Okay. There is some words from Pa Mutakin. Sorry that he could not join the Zoom, but maybe he will try to join a bit later. All right. So without any further ado, I will just now give the time for Mas Fakih.
Thank you very much, Mbak Irma, Mbak Fatima. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa walah, amma ba'd. Of course, I would like to thank all parties from ICRS, my teachers there, my colleague, beloved friends, and also parties from UIN Sunan Kalijaga. And of course, Honorable Guru, Ustadzah, Ibu Nyai Hajah Amina Wadud, my teacher, and of course, thanks very much for being here with us. Actually, when Mbak Irma called me, I'm so fascinated, but in the same time also worrying enough whether I could express well or not. But I hope I can do it well. And Alhamdulillah, we are still healthy now and can meet together here in this online dialogue. Our event this afternoon, I think, is also to celebrate International Women's Day and also to celebrate the 5th anniversary of ICRS. And of course, to welcome Ibu Amina Start as visiting lecturer at ICRS UGM and UIN Sunan Kalijaga. I'm so fortunate and blessed that in 2010, I had an opportunity to be her student at the ICRS, although I had several meetings in global Musawa forums. And now I am so honored to be her moderator on the topic of knowledge and change in Islam. As you know all that Ibu Amina is an inspiration of the world for faith-based activism, or what she called as gender jihad. He or she is the most distinctive example of interconnectedness of the lived experience, knowledge, and activism. Born as Methodist Christian, then converted into Islam while she was student of the University of Pennsylvania in 1972, then began studying the Quran and Arabic in Libya, Egypt, and also US, of course. And we know that her magnum opus is Quran and Women, rereading the sacred text from a woman's perspective, published in 1992 for the first time. Ibu Amina experienced life realities of injustice as women in our patriarchal societies, as an African American struggling with racism in the US, besides as a Muslim dealing with Islamophobia on the one hand and with fundamentalism or conservatism on the other. Based on all of this experience, Ibu Amina has set her heart as a mujahidah for Islamic gender justice or Islamic feminism in the midst of two main poles, namely those who want to impose Islamic classical knowledge, which is unjust to women, and those that impose feminism by removing Islamic knowledge. This choice, of course, is the fruit of complex and rich struggles, be it experience, faith, knowledge, and activism. Today, we will have a dialogue or conversation with Ibu Amina, and she will share with us all of these things. The total time that we have, as Mbak Irma told us, is about 70 minutes. And the first 10 minutes will be the prologue from Ibu Amina, and 20 minutes is like a conversation or question from me. And then the remaining is about 40 minutes is open dialogue for all the participants. So you participant may talk directly, or maybe you can write down in chatting room. Now the time for Ibu Amina.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I begin, as I always begin, in the name of Allah, whose grace I seek in this and all other matters. It is my pleasure to be here with my colleagues, Professor Zainal Abidin, Fatima Hussein, and Professor Dr. Faqih, because I have been retired for 15 years,
Wow.
with the exception of coming to ICRS when Faqiuddin was my student. And it was the best teaching experience I had ever had. So I am so pleased to see my colleague prosper. I will tell you one little anecdote and then I'll get very serious. I was in a discussion for another interview somewhere, and they said, well, we don't have an Amina Wadud for Hadith. I said, yes, we do. And his name is Faqiuddin, and he was my student.
Thank you.
So it is a great pleasure, not just for this forum, but also because I was having a very happy and productive life as retired. And so there's no motivation for me to come out of it except to go forward, to go higher. And I really consider this a blessed opportunity to join the joint institutions of the postgraduate program at UIN Sunan Kalijaga and the Indonesian Consortium of Religious Studies, because the experience that I have had in the context of the general population of Muslims in Indonesia is that there is a very deep respect for the knowledge traditions. Islam is one of the most rich traditions in the world, be they religious or otherwise. But in the context of religion, the very idea that we take into consideration not only the physical, but the metaphysical in the ways in which we pursue knowledge, in which we understand and absorb knowledge, and the ways in which we produce knowledge. It is this aspect of knowledge production that has actually stimulated my life work, because we belong to a tradition that starts with the receipt of knowledge in the form of revelation to the Prophet Muhammad, upon him be peace. And so that starts us off already with a high trajectory, because even after more than 14 centuries, the wisdom of the Quran still shines bright. As Dr. Faqih mentioned, I actually fell in love with the Quran almost from the moment I took my Shahada. It's been almost 50 years and I'm still in love with the Quran. And I consider that a blessing unparalleled by many things that people experience in their lives. I loved it so much, I went on to study for my master's and PhD with a focus on the Quran, and eventually I started writing books on the Quran. So how many people can have that many years to speak with that much love? So when love drives knowledge, there are no limits. So the reality is that Islam is a dynamic system, and in order for that system to remain excellent, that dynamism must be maintained. And that means, despite the wealth of knowledge that has come through our intellectual past, we must, at every generation, continue to contribute to that knowledge. We are now experiencing a global pandemic. We will learn things about the human community from this pandemic, unlike anything we could have anticipated just a year ago when I came first to visit the campus in February of 2020. The things that we learn have to be integrated. They have to become a holistic part of how we consider what is the well-being of the human being. The human community itself presents us with many challenges of how we even understand what is knowledge. Knowledge is not just Arnold Schwarzenegger and the Terminator computer generated bits and bytes of information. Knowledge is a deep integration of what we know to establish a quality of living that reflects what we know. It's like when you tell a child, don't touch the stove, it's hot, panas, panas. Sometimes the child will listen, other times the child will go and touch, and when they do, almost immediately they learn how to say the word, oh, panas. It's because they know. So how do we know? How do we know what we know? How do we even manage to develop an understanding of a thing? This hermeneutical process has interested humankind from the moment that we began to be challenged by our environment. We could have been challenged by something as simple as the moon passing in front of the sun and causing an eclipse. Is it night? Why, just 5 minutes ago, it was full on daytime. We pursued knowledge about it, and last week we had a new arrival on the planet Mars, and we will collect data that will continue to enhance the way we know what we know and we do what we do as humans on the planet. In my estimation, and with my bias, I believe that Muslims should always be in the forefront of knowledge pursuit, knowledge production, and also the absorption of knowledge for the benefit of humankind. Anybody who comes up with a vaccination for the coronavirus cannot have it only for their own people. It has to be for everyone in the planet, because we have seen what the effects of a global pandemic, even in the 21st century, what it will yield if we do not learn how to share our knowledge. As we have absorbed it and benefited from it, we must also benefit others. So for that reason, I'm especially pleased to return to the academic context of the study of Islam with my particular focus on gender. And I'm actually even more interested to work with students to talk about how they become knowledge producers, how they challenge the knowledge that they receive in order to make sure that that knowledge will benefit them. In the context of Islam, it is true that around the time of the Abbasid dynasty, the contributions of women and non-binary began to be eclipsed by a predominance of patriarchal thinking. Patriarchy is neither unique to nor exclusive with Islam. It was a system based on a fundamental understanding that some humans are better than other humans. That's one of the reasons why we could practice the institution of slavery even amongst Muslims, because we felt that it was reasonable to offer certain rights and benefits to slaves while at the same time never considering them to be equal to the master. In the 21st century, such an idea is no longer tenable, not only because we think the institution of slavery is abhorrent, but also because the fundamental idea of the equality, the musawa, the tawhidic reciprocity between human beings is the only way for us to achieve what the scholars have unanimously agreed upon in Islam, and that is that Islam is just. If Islam is just, it must be just for all people. It must be just to this planet, which for the moment is the only one we know that we can inhabit. And it must also integrate that metaphysical with the physical. And that is that there is a dimension to Islamic knowledge which is not limited to just bytes and bits of information, but rather goes deep into the very core of what makes us human. And when we understand our own humanity, it is natural that we should extend that humanity and that understanding of humanity to all. But not all people are the same. In fact, every person is unique. Arriving at the place where we affirm this dynamism of Islamic knowledge and this integration of that knowledge with the deepest levels of human well-being is something I've had the pleasure of living my life towards, and something I look forward to a radical contribution, a radical challenge, and radical change in the way in which we perceive of humanity and we contribute to knowledge. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you very much, Ibu Amina. There are many quotable words. One of it is that when there is love, drive knowledge, it will be no limits production. So you motivate us always to be a knowledge producer, and not only merely knowledge, but knowledge that deeply integrated with the quality of life, especially human well-being. And just some maybe question or another conversation, because you already come into the such kind of powerful knowledge is very unique compared to others, because you have experience. When I read your book, your documentary film, it's very not only rich but rooted in the experience, in the lived experience. So when we Indonesian people have wisdom, al-ilmu bila amalin, kasyajari bila samarin, that knowledge without activism, without change, is like a tree without fruit. But also from your experience, I think the knowledge also should be rooted in the experience. So the knowledge without experience, like the tree without root, without the root. So this is very unique from you, but the question is how about people who may experience such thing but do not realize that it is injustice, or some women also maybe do not experience, since in Indonesia some women, let's say, have a good relationship with men, or many men do not experience that injustices. The question is how we relate that knowledge to be relevant to them. Thank you.
In my estimation, all knowledge is produced from a location. And that location is either explicit or implicit. Unfortunately, the implicit sometimes was overlooked. So for example, there is a tendency to project certain ideas as fundamental or significant to Islam, but they have been rooted in the location of men in societies, in the home, in politics, as well as in their own spiritual practices. So they project them as universal, but there are certain elements that are very specific, and yet for the major part of our intellectual tradition, this specificity was overlooked. First of all, they were scholars, they were sincere, they were dedicated, they developed their understanding to the finest, and yet they were still located in the body. I'll give you a small example before I talk about the other aspects. A few weeks ago, someone said on Twitter something about the sunnah of 1/3 full, 1/3 liquid or water, and 1/3 empty, because this was the practice of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I said, yes, but the Prophet was not a woman. And if you are pregnant or nursing, these formulas are not only ineffective, they are dangerous, because you have the responsibility to consume not only for yourself, but for the child. Does that make a woman deviant because she is pregnant? No, it simply means that the formulas were located and we did not take into consideration enough those locations until the work that was done by Muslim feminists in recent years, the significance of remembering that we're always speaking from a location was not returned to a fundamental manhaj or methodology of examining even the ways in which we understand and apply the wisdom from the sacred text. At the same time, there are also certain fundamental aspects about human-to-human relations, and I talked about that before. One of the most inspirational things for me was coming to understand Tawheed not simply as an expression of the unique nature of Allah's oneness or Allah's unified nature, but also as an expression of the ways in which we should organize society, politics, economics, the family, the environment. And that is that we should seek a way in which there is always an affirming, reciprocal relationship between those who are engaged in any kind of relationship. It does not mean that there are not going to be functionaries who must perform more. So for example, the able-bodied are commanded to stand when they pray, and yet it says, if you're able, meaning that if you are not able to stand, you are still allowed to pray, you're allowed to be the imam, even though your performance will not be the same as one who is able-bodied, because the merit of the performance is in the niyyah of its performance and not only in the external formula. So one of the exciting aspects of my life is to leave my own studies and arrive in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia in 1989, when I was challenged by women working on Muslim personal status law to bring myself out of the hair-splitting aspects of academic study back to the practicality of how theory and theology can be applied to policy and practice. After that, there was no turning back. I always have to think, how does this apply in real circumstances? So sometimes when a person is privileged to have a beneficent patriarch, my father himself, who was a Methodist minister, was a beneficent patriarch. He didn't want my mother to work because we still lived in the racist society in America, and men wanted to protect their women, obviously, from that racism. But the consequence of being a prolific person with 8 children is that we lived in poverty. So if two workers from the household were able to contribute, it might have changed the status a little bit, but my father, out of his beneficence, wanted my mother to be protected. So even while there is the intention of the good, there is the overall assessment of the location to determine what might be the best way to go forward. And that one, again, has to remain dynamic. It has to be dialogical. It means that you must continue to discuss, continue to examine, continue to work at the parameters of your own understanding in order to yield that which will bring the most life or hay into your worship, into your home, into your family, into your community, into your country, into the world at large, and into the universe. That's what I think.
Thank you very much. I got endless learn from you, and now actually my experience when I come to the pesantren and talking or calling people to what you call as Tauhidic paradigm. While in Indonesia, some Muslim of course, but at least among NU and pesantren, and maybe you also encounter some Muslim communities in the other countries. The concept of Tauhid is of course powerful, but this concept is not in the heart of some people like NU and pesantren, because the concept of Tauhid brought by modernists, Salafi, and also here Muhammadiyah. Yeah, NU of course has tahlil. Tahlil also la ilaha illallah, but tahlil is much more cultural and social rather than the monotheistic paradigm. So it's different. So sometimes I come to the stuck when I say about Tauhid. What Tauhid? So the question is, when you have other encounter with other people or other communities, is there any other similar powerful knowledge rather than Tauhid? Or before come to Tauhid, what kind of similar powerful, because the Tauhid is very, very, very powerful, but sometimes it's not working for some people. So the question is other similar powerful knowledge within Islamic tradition to call people which are not in their heart that kind of Tauhid? Thank you.
Well, I have to confess my bias as a theologian. I start with the metaphysical, and in fact, I quite enjoyed it. And then, as I said, I was challenged to make it pragmatic and to find ways to put it into implementation. But for me, the reality is I could not work on the implementation unless I had centered myself on the divine trajectory, on the reality of Allah as a fundamental element in the transformation of society. So I'm not always the strongest person in terms of the application. I learned so much from people who have different lived realities, but also who have worked more, as a mediator in the context of living social context. But I do like the terms musawa and mubadala because they have a sense of applied reality. They are contributions of my colleagues, and they help me to augment the fact that I tend still to relish the abstract thought. So I'm not the proponent of the most engaged practical aspects of things. My calling is in theology. I make my contribution from my location, and then I listen and I try to learn. But I think sometimes I go back to the prophetic hadith, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه, which in literal articulation, once again, only says one of you does not believe until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. So the first thing that I have to do is to look at the universal implications and render another translation, which is to say, one of you does not believe until he or she loves for an other what they love for self. But the notion is that just as we are experiencing human beings, that is, human beings who have experience, so are we in an interaction or encounter with other human beings who are having experience. And the other human being is the one to best express what their location is. So for example, if there is a cry for victimhood, that I have experienced abuse on the part of someone else, we must always listen to the victim, even as the one who was guilty of the abuse may be a person with greater power and greater voice. We must always listen to the victim because we must always learn how to hear the voice of whoever speaks. It's a form of courtesy, adab, but it's also a form of humanity and humility. And yet, when we arrive at a solution, the solution must also encompass everyone. And it will not encompass everyone when we live continually in power dynamics where some people have more power, privilege, and access than others. So the way to balance it, the mubadala, is to actually do the active exchange that is intended in that word. It doesn't mean that everyone will understand how I use certain terms like tawheed, taqwa, and khalifa in their metaphysical way. I use them metaphysically, but I make analogies between the practical, and then I defer to those who have greater strengths in the practical application to help me to articulate it in a way that will be more accessible.
So the Tawhid actually also maybe call everybody to produce their knowledge in their location in order to have best or quality of life, and also make a dialogue in the real live realities. And the last, before I open to the participants, as you know, in Indonesia especially, and also other part in the Muslim world, that Islamic tradition is already rich, as you say, and also very complex. We have philosophy, we have tasawwuf, Sufism, especially fiqh, which is misunderstood as the Sharia or the pure Sharia, while it is much more ijtihad. It is, of course, very good to come to the Quran, as Quran is very limited verse, and much of Quran is norms. I mean universal norms. While we have already the heritage, the tradition, the knowledge that very much, very rich and also very complex. It is not easy to say goodbye, and also it is impossible to apply all of that knowledge. So in Indonesia, like UIN has already many faculties of Islamic knowledge, and the question is how we approach that diversity of knowledge, which is very rich, which in the construction, as you say, and as we realize, is a very patriarchal construction. But we should do it. I mean, the change should be within our tradition. So for the Quran, is like easy to have such methods or such reading, while for this book of tradition is complex. So the questions: what do you think? What do you propose for one who work in the Islamic University, which has a very complex and rich heritage?
Well, I definitely would not water down the rich heritage, and the reason is because for every amount of knowledge that we have, there is even more knowledge out there. But I also think that sometimes I think everything comes down to epistemology. In other words, how do we define or use terms? Most people use the word tradition only as if it is in reference to something past. So now I tend to augment my statement by saying living traditions. there are traditions that need to be retained, and there are traditions that need to be changed. The only way to measure the difference between these two is to put an emphasis on the dynamism that is the living tradition. Excuse me, because some of the things that we propose are not tenable. So for example, there's an issue here with the thing that's, it's called child marriage. But actually when the child doesn't consent, I don't consider that to be marriage myself. But in Indonesia, because of the rural populations, you do have a pretty high percentage of these instances, and everything is done above board and all of that. And yet the statistics indicate that the rate of failure in such marriages is very high, and that the consequences are very high. For example, in Afghanistan, where they also have this practice, there is a higher than usual percentage of mortalities through pregnancy, that women, the maternal mortality, women who become mothers lose their lives because it's too much of a strain. How do we measure where we will produce new knowledge or make change, except again on the basis of the location? And we do have to look comprehensively. So for example, if the information is not available in the Sunnah of the Prophet, upon him be peace, or in his Hadith, or in the Quran, does that mean that there is no knowledge? If that was the case, then there should be no Muslim scientists or medical professors or researchers dealing with the development of a vaccine for corona, which would be ridiculous. So in other words, we do have to maintain a healthy interaction between the past traditions and the need for new traditions, so that we're always in the forefront of knowledge, which goes back to my first comment, and that is knowledge is not knowledge if it's not beneficial. So I think that even though there are challenges to the ways in which we integrate everyday life with the ways in which we may reflect philosophically or theologically and even spiritually with regard to things, I do believe that the goal is to integrate these in a dynamic way, and that the practical life should be infused with that spirit and knowledge, and that knowledge and spirit should be infused with the ways in which it can be put into application.
Thank you, Ibu Amina, for very fruitful conversation. And now open to participant. Mbak Irma can help me with who has a question. Okay.
Would you like to ask like direct questions first? Maybe we can allow people to directly.
Okay. Yeah.
I saw in the chat box.
Is there any participant who want to talk directly, to ask directly here?
Yes, please, if it is possible.
Okay.
Hello, Mbak Tami, are you there?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
This is a very interesting question, if I may.
Yes, can you hear me?
You're slow and you keep freezing.
Oh, so sorry. Yeah, because I'm very happy to see you directly. First, I know your name when I was with Para Madinah a couple of years ago from the Holy Masjid, and then I'd like to know. I'd like to raise my question. So I want to know what is the most challenging thing you have found when you were trying to dig out the beauty of justice, gender in Islam. Especially, I think that you also have faced many barriers, many challenging. And how did you tackle or overcome the challenges? Because I know that right now you have race and practical, for example, as imam of salat, and for most of people that it is impossible, but you know that. So what is the challenges and how you overcome a kind of challenges or barriers? Thank you so much, Ibu. Sehat selalu karena Ibu bisa bahasa Indonesia. Saya
Amin,
tahu.
amin, amin.
Thank you.
Ada salam
Thank
Pak
you.
Kiai
Ya.
Muhammad. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Amin.
Makasih.
I will tell you that as I get older, I perceive of challenges very differently from when I was younger. And the main challenge is for me to remember that with love, knowledge is more beneficial. Because I experience just the everyday frustration of being a single parent to 5 children and a professional, and at the same time doing an extensive amount of community work, both in my own location when I was in the US, as well as in other parts of the globe. And sometimes I didn't realize that I needed to care for myself in that formula. And now that I'm older and my children are adults and they're having their own children, I spend more time on my spiritual work. And that helps me to face the challenges in less of a frustrating manner than I did when I was younger, because I'm not responsible for other people's faith. And if I allow my faith to be challenged because I have been a seeker of knowledge, you know, from even when I was quite young, I'm the only person in my family with a university degree, and I have 3 of them. I am a person who left her home, her family at the age of 14 in order to pursue a better education. So the knowledge, the appeal of knowledge for me has very deep roots. It's even before I came to Islam. But because of it, sometimes I think I would become a little bit impatient. I'm still an impatient person, to be honest, but I no longer look at the location of people on the planet and in my community as Muslims. I no longer look at that as something that I must individually and personally make right. People have to make their peace with their maker, and I have to make peace with my maker. And I also want to experience that peace right here and right now, and not just when I die. So as such, I've developed a better sense of humor. I didn't have it when I was young. And I've developed a better sense of understanding that everybody does not speak from the same place, and that's okay. And that everybody doesn't have the same goals, and that's okay. But before, I was in that, you know how Muslims say, the true Islam, or, you know, that's not right in Islam, or, you know, and I used to think there was a pure Islam, that somehow that, you know, if I just pushed hard enough, I would get it and everyone would get it along with me. I don't think that anymore. I think of Islam as a living system in which we participate and we draw from it. And as long as that dynamic is going on, I have greater contentment in my life. And I'm not so much bothered by the challenges that I used to be bothered by when I was younger, to be honest.
Okay, thank you, Ibu Amina. Is there other question?
Mas Fakih, maybe I can read one question from the chat box. Ibu Amina, this is a question from someone named Lugita Nurhajar. We are never equal. This is a statement from one of women rural community when we have finished the gender equality and social inclusion education. To get the gender equality in the rural is so hard because the knowledge of Islam is limited. So the question is how to share the Islamic knowledge in rural community with the Mubadalah perspective?
I don't think you think I'm an expert on how to share in the rural community.
Yeah.
But I do want to say something again about the metaphysical and the physical, the abstract, the theological, the philosophical, and the practical. Even in the places where people say we are not equal, they usually mean we are not the same. And we have to teach people about equality as a substantive reflection of the access to goods in our own communities. So for example, Musawa has a picture where they have 3 boxes and 3 kids trying to look over the fence to see the ball game. The kids are 3 different heights. If each one of them is given a box to stand on, the tall kid is way higher than the fence. The short kid still can't see, and then the one in the middle is fine. So actually, the short kid needs 2 boxes in order to see over, because the tall kid can see over with no box, and the middle kid can see over with 1 box. It is not the same, but that is equality, because the end result is that each of them have access. So sometimes when you are teaching in places where abstract reasoning is not the best modality, you must develop tools for communication that breaks it down in a way that is accessible. I learned a lot about this working in communities across the globe, but I am the student. I am the one learning. I am still very fond of the philosophical, theological, and epistemological abstractions. And I unfortunately have very little that I think I can offer in the rural communities, except for my love of knowledge. So I would share whatever I have, but that does not mean it's going to be helpful. It might be too abstract.
Thank you. Monggo, Mas Fakih. You're still muted, Mas.
Is there other question here in the chat book?
Yeah, but I don't know if you want to take like more, like probably one direct question. There is
okay.
There is someone from Malaysia by name of Shafiq.
Shafiq, please.
Shafiq Ismail, would you like to?
Please unmute and talk directly. There is many question in the chat room.
Yeah, I'm trying to sort it out.
Where is Shafiq? Shafiq.
Okay, I can read it. I can read it for you, Ibu Amina. Yeah. Can we utilize the Tawhidic paradigm you mentioned earlier to solve or minimize the polemical Sunni, Shia, traditionalist, modernist, progressive, non-progressive, etc.? Salam from Shafiq in Malaysia.
So the understanding of the Tawhidic paradigm is based on the fact that the word Tawhid comes from the second form of the verb wahada, which is dynamic. It is not simply that Allah is one, but rather that in Allah is the unity of all things. In fact, the more diversity that there is, the more the necessity of Tawheed. So it's an organizing principle. It is not a distinction between Sunni or Shia or Ahmadi or Sufi. It is rather the ways in which we integrate between all of these. And not only that, there is also the Tawheed between the different aspects of our own personalities. There's some aspects of my personality that are very jalal, very masculine, very assertive, very goal-oriented. And there's some aspects of my personality that are very Jamal, very receptive, and very abstract, and very beautiful. And yet, I am not a whole person except with all of these. So we are not a whole community of Muslims except with all of our disparate parts. So I hope there will always be differences between us, but that we will unify across our differences for the ultimate goal of surrender to Allah. What that means in practical situations, once again, I think should be worked out by people in those situations. There is not a single solution that works for everybody, but I love having this single organizing principle, because whenever there is chaos, I wonder what is the way to make harmony and beauty from this chaos, because the way of Allah is harmonious and beautiful, like everything in the creation. So I don't think that we look at the distinctions between Muslims across time and place and history and pretend that somehow they cannot be resolved. Instead, we say each of them make a contribution to the fabric of our lives. And as such, each of them bring something that will benefit the ways that we work towards the ultimate unity.
Thank you, Ibu Amina. There is a question from Eva Sotiriado. I don't know. I'm good reading the name. How do you personally engage with authoritative classical interpretation of Sharia that validate patriarchy and misogyny within contemporary Muslim communities?
I have to say that I have found it is not beneficial for the objectives I have in my life to work in negation. So my job is not to get rid of patriarchy, but rather to promote equality, musawa, mubadila, justice. And by working towards what I want to see in the world, by trying to be what it is I hope to see in the world, it is much easier for me to actually achieve some goals. If I thought my time was better spent constantly negating something that I find difficult, then I would never achieve anything. I would always be reacting. So I want to be an affirmed actor towards justice, harmony, beauty, unity, and the like. And so I put my attention towards the goal. I do not put my attention towards the challenge or the opposition. I know they are there, but if I give a comprehensive answer or response about how to move forward, the answer to the negation will already be there. You know, today we have a very deep and I think false preoccupation with extremism, fundamentalism, radicalism, and the like. And so people give more attention to radicalism than they give to beauty. And I don't think that's the way to go. I think we need to work more and more towards lifting up the light that already shines, towards showing the examples of the ones who have already lived an integrated life and managed to be beneficial to the community. I think by focusing on the light, we do a better job at eradicating the dark. So my focus is not to negate. My focus is to create. I co-create with the creator, capital C.
I do agree. So our work should be in creation and not negation. And we should pay attention much more on the light, on the example, good examples, and there are many actually, while some people like very much the dark, the dark one. The next, yep.
And some people like polemics.
Yeah.
Some people like to argue. I have 5 planets in Libra. I don't like to argue. I like to achieve things. And some of what I want to achieve, there are people who disagree, but I don't do it out of disagreement. I do it out of affirmation. And I think if not only that, it's less exhausting because you're always going towards new life. You're going towards the light. But if all of your attention is towards trying to get rid of the negative, eventually you get tainted by the negative. And I think it can make people very bitter, and also it can lead to faster burnout. So, you know, it's just a strategy, but I feel that, someone asked earlier about the challenges and everything. And I said, I just experience things so differently now that I'm older. And one of the ways is that I have to try to work on the negativity in myself by light, but I spend less time worrying about how to argue against somebody that I disagree with. I just look and I say, oh, I disagree with that. I need to tell you, I've been in Indonesia for 2 years now. And one of the reasons that I'm here is because I got tired of hearing the previous president to the United States, not just because he was a very horrible person, which he is, but because even my friends spent so much time negatively talking about him. I just thought it's exhausting because even amongst those you want to, work with, and you can't get encouragement. All you get is the negation. It was exhausting. I just thought I need to go to the other side of the planet, and I've been here ever since. So I'm really happy.
But if you understand Indonesia, I think somewhere is also happened here. Anyway, it's a good that we should pay attention much more on the positive, on the creation, on the effort that already good and as light for all of us. The next, Mbak Irma, there's
Well, I was thinking maybe like if we can give a few minutes for Ibu Amina a break. There is a question directed to you, Mas Fakih. Excuse me, I wanted to ask Mr. Fakihuddin Abdul Qadir, is the Mubadalah theory included in Ma'anil studies or hermeneutics? What is the standard method or system of this theory to reading the text like Al-Quran and Hadith?
Yeah, I just want to quote from Dr. Amina that Mubadalah is also like love. I mean, it can create everything. It is a love that which will, if it drive us, it will create everything. In my experience, of course, Mubadalah is perspective that based on the Tawhidic paradigm, on how we see each other as the servants of God, of Allah, and become Khalifah, of course, so no one and other as the below or upper. So, but this perspective also drive us into the knowledge, into the interpretation, into the methods, even the methods on how we read the text, any text, the Quran, the Hadith, and even the law itself. So if we have a paradigm, if we have the perspective, so everything will be seen from that paradigm on how we create the good one, the light, as Ibu Amina said. So maybe Ibu Amina, Ibu Nurafi'ah in the Quran side, I will be in the Hadith side. In the Hadith, in the sense that people take from the Hadith is the, let's say, the bad thing, the dark thing that that will make people become not the good one in terms of gender relationship. While there are many other methods that can we see the Hadith as the inspiration, of course not the whole thing, but as inspiration in order to make us become good moral or akhlakul karimah, rahmatan lil alamin, that we can become a wise and good husband, and also wise and good wife, and also good person in terms of gender relationship. So of course the Mubadalah is not only perspective, but it can be or become the methods of interpretation, and even the production. I mean, the interpretation itself. That I already compiled the 60 hadiths on the right of woman with the interpretation using the mubadalah method. And the next month also I will publish the hadiths that already assumed by the Muslim feminists like Fatima Mernisi as the misogynist hadith, while I try to put it in the context of dynamic, how the universal norm in that time put in the context of patriarchal, and then we do not take the text itself, but the inspiration, but the dynamic itself on how we put down the substance, the principle into our life, into our living tradition, living hadith. So it can become another interpretation. I don't know it is apologetic or not, but to me, hadith is powerful to be interpreted because every day we live with the people, with the hadith, with the live realities, and people rely on that hadith, and they ask me how to make that hadith relevant to their life. So I think we can take the dynamic, not the text itself, but the dynamic on how the norms or the universal norms, which is justice, peace, and etc., we can take it from the text that may be assumed by some people as misogyny. So the next month I will publish that the book about the hadith that already assumed by. Of course, I still still translated as a normal, but we try to integrate it with the universal and the vision, the mission of Islam itself, on how create the peace, create the justice, create the. So of course, when we create the justice, there are unequal position, there are unequal condition. Within that unequal condition, sometimes the word or the text might be assumed it's like serving that context, while the idea is not serving that context, but how to make the substance living in that context, practice in that context. So we transfer that kind of dynamic in our situation on how we create that substance, that justice, and that peace. So people who believe or in the hadith still rely on that hadith, but in other understanding, in mubadalah way of understanding. But people who do not believe in that hadith, you don't need to believe. You can use Quran, you can use law, you can use other. While for people who already living with that hadith or tradition, their holistic interpretation, what I call as mubadalah, is mubadalah not only between women and men, but also between me as interpreter with text. I learned from Ibu Amina in the HIS on how become dialogue interpretation. So
is this Bahasa or English? Because I'm really anxious to see this.
Sorry?
Is this going to be written in Bahasa or in English?
Bahasa, sorry.
I'll work on my language skills, I promise.
But you already here more than 2 or 3 years, I think.
Bisa, tapi aku mau lebih bagus.
Ibu Fatima will translate, inshallah.
Fakih, there is another question. Do you want me to read or you can read it? It's from Riri Hariro.
Yeah, you can read it. I didn't find yet.
Prof. Amina, in my opinion, there is one issue that's still very sensitive and very hard to talk about in the Muslim world, namely the rights of LGBTQ. I would like to hear about your reflection about the issue from the perspective of gender justice in Islam. Thanks so much.
My last almost job was a research grant for 3 years, and I worked on the classical expressions of sexual diversity and human dignity. I always had to juxtapose these two things because there is diversity, but there is no condition under which we can remove the dignity. So whenever there was a compromise between the dignity and the identity, then I went towards the affirmation of the identity. So I went to Quran and then tafsir and epistemology. And then I went to Hadith and Sirah of the Prophet, and then I went to fiqh. Unfortunately, I didn't get to Shia fiqh because I didn't get to it. I saturated the third year before I got to it. I learned so much from this opportunity, and also I became even more affirmed that human diversity is a part of the expression of our humanity, and that gender identity is not fixed. Everything that is masculine is not male, and everything that is female is not feminine. But I also began to work more on the divine feminine, that Allah has both Jamal or feminine attributes and Sifa, as well as Jalal, masculine attributes or Sifa, but Allah is not male and Allah is not female. But wedding my own sort of theological thinking with the location of the reality and requirement of human dignity for all persons, I have come to quite a substantial amount of conclusions with regard to it, which I cannot summarize in a short period of time, but suffices to say that the overall understanding that I received when I finished this 3 years of review of the classical traditions, the first 500 years, is that inclusion was the mandate. The attention that was given to make sure that everyone could be included in their practice, in their decision to marry, in their decision to have families, etc., was actually a surprise, because the common parlance today is that there is a comprehensive black and white understanding. And actually, I did not find the black and white understanding. And as such, I learned to embrace another exegetical tool, and that was the significance of ambiguity. What do we do with the silences in the Quran? And how are they also part of the instruments of guidance? Obviously, from the beginning of this talk, I have to make sure that everything centers on the location of the persons who do not identify in the dominant model of heterosexual identity. If you are not in that identity, then the story has to center around your own lived reality. And that lived reality, by my experience with communities of queer, non-binary, LGBTQI Muslims over the past almost 20 years, is that there is a strong thrust for faith and participation in faith when they are up against a community that pretends that Islam is for all persons, all places, and all times, but somehow Islam is not for you. There's a serious problem when we want to express Islam as universal, but then you say you can't be gay and Muslim, because that means that Islam is not universal. So there are many elements to the experiences of research in this period of 3 years, not all of which I've had a chance to even share. But one of the things that I'm hoping to work on while I'm here in Yogyakarta is the development of an aspect of study that is queer Islamic theology. And it will be a part of the trajectory of gender studies because, of course, it's about gender identity. And we can't be complete in our understanding of gender if we believe that gender is the strict category of male and female, which it is not. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff. And I just wanted to give you a little taste of the kinds of things that I hope to go forward with, inshallah.
Inshallah. So how, Mbak Fatima, there are still other questions? Should I read or we?
Yeah, there is one more question that
not one. This is from Fitria Susana Meliana and then from Ali.
Okay. Well, Fitriana, I think earlier you have responded to another question from her. There is a question from Mila Farihatul Ahna. As a knowledge seeker and producer, how can we realize that we don't know? That we don't know that we don't know. Related to
yes, you know, when the classical scholars investigated any area of thought or any ilm from the ulum, they wrote their treatise, their books, and their what do you call it? Dissertations. They wrote their work, and then they said, "Wallahu a'lam." I love this because it means that they accept that I have exerted my best effort to understand this thing, and from that understanding to share what I have understood. But the bottom line is that Allah knows best. And the importance of it is a space of humility, because if we presume at the end of anything that we know it all, then we have no space to grow in knowledge. So mostly we don't know. That is the predominant aspect of every human being, no matter how much we do know, mostly we don't know. You cannot ask me anything about the geology of the earth and have me know anything that I can tell you, but I still walk on the earth and I still pick up rocks when I'm walking. So I have a relationship with the geology of the earth, but I don't know anything. And there's so many other fields of knowledge. And the beauty of it is there's always something you can learn, and every day you can always know something different. So it is in the not knowing that you open yourself up to the knowledge of Allah, and Allah can take you to the next stage of whatever it is that you're doing. So not knowing is really the dominant.
Here, I think is still question, is it, Mbak Irma?
Okay. Yeah, we still have about 8 minutes.
Okay, excuse me, I want to ask to Ibu Amina Wadud, is everything in religion equally valid between men and women? And how can we see that it is just or not proclaims in Al-Baqarah verse 216 that we consider bad is not necessarily bad?
First of all, when we open ourselves up to the quantum physics infinite realm of possibilities, we cannot hope to come through the infinite realm and make it finite. In other words, there is no easy way to conclude once and for all what is the good and what is the bad. That's why I always make a joke. There's a book in English that's called The Halal and the Haram in Islam, and it's like 135 pages. If everything that was halal and haram could fit into 135 pages, the planet would be in perfect condition. It is not. And that is because even some things that were not good at one time might become good in other locations and circumstances, and some things that were good can become very, very bad. And that is one of the reasons why, as I spoke earlier, I talked about living traditions. And the living tradition is based on location. In other words, we all have to be located. And so for example, if I have a pandemic, like the one we're experiencing, and I grow fruit because I have 2 fruit trees, the priority of the fruit will change when my community is in need, from the situation of need to when everybody in my community has 2 or 3 or 6 fruit trees. And yet there is still some benefit in the fruit. So how do I, even under a pandemic, make it possible to have access to that product, that fruit, to communities when there are restrictions on my travel? I have to live in location. And my 2 fruit trees, if nobody else in the community had fruit, would serve that community, immediate community. But if everybody has it, it is excess. And so there is no static position where you can say this is the good and this is not the good, but you have to measure it against the locality. It is true that in terms of the measurement between the benefits of certain things and the way in which we see benefit, there has been a disparity across the history of Islam and Muslims. But those are not permanent. Those are manifestations of the lack of understanding that we're supposed to have today. Today, we understand that when the moon comes in front of the sun, first of all, an eclipse never lasts for more than 3 or 4 minutes. So we know it's going to be over. But there was a time in history when all they knew was that all of a sudden the night came in the daytime, and it was very frightening and overwhelming. Whereas now, I mean, I know I went to the island of Sumatra in December 2019, so I could see the total eclipse when it came in the island of Sumatra at that time, because now we know it's an event, and it's an event to be celebrated, and the chance to be present to see it is not frightening. In fact, it's beautiful. So knowledge changes, and we're supposed to change with the knowledge. The world changes. That's what Allah gave us. Allah gave us a living earth because Allah is Al-Hayy. So I don't tend towards, there's a fixed answer. I tend towards what Dr. Faqih talked about, the principles. I do tend towards thinking through principles, and I do think towards principles in application. And that is why it is that I must continually work with communities, and I must continually work in communities that are diverse, and I must engage with difference in such a way to arrive at harmony nevertheless. So I just see all the good possibilities as being stronger than the ways in which it is that we must close everything off. Everything is either halal or haram. I don't see the world like that anymore.
Thank you very much, Ibu Amina. May Allah bless you and give you rewards and also good health. Let's give claps to Ibu Amina. Now it's already 3 to 5. So I will give back the forum to Mbak Irma. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you so very much. We have received so many words of thanks in the chat box for Ibu Amina and Mas Faqih. I'm sure we have learned many things this afternoon as a very good way to celebrating the International Women's Day. And once again, I would like to extend our warm welcome to Ibu Amina, especially to our academic community. There is also a chat from the wife of the rector of UIN Sunan Kalijaga. I don't know whether you know her, Mbak Rokfah, who also extended her welcome to you at the campus UIN Sunan Kalijaga, Yogyakarta.
She's here.
She is here, yeah.
Yeah.
And Bu Amina has started her teaching, her class this semester at UIN Sunan Kalijaga. And next semester, inshallah, will be also teaching a course at ICRS. So please, once again, join me in thanking Ibu Amina and
Thank
Mas
you.
Falke.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. It is my pleasure and delight to be here. Please keep me in your prayers.
Okay.
Inshallah.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you everyone. And just a very last announcement in the chat box, you will read a link which you will need to click later for those of you who need an electronic certificate for this event. Okay, thank you everyone who also made this event possible, all the teams at ICRS and at UIN. Hope we will see you soon in a different occasion. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.